The wind, a cruel sculptor, had long since carved despair into the skeletal remains of the depot. Dust, fine as a shroud, layered every surface, tasting of forgotten promises and cold iron. Alara, no more than 17, felt its grit between her teeth, in her eyes, an unwelcome companion to the ache of hunger that gnawed at her insides. Her mother had held onto a thread of hope here, at this desolate junction, waiting for a train that never came, for a man who had vanished like mist in the harsh prairie sun. Now, the mother's quiet breath had ceased, leaving Alara alone with the ghosts of deceit and the raw, unblinking truth of the world. Her fingers, chapped and raw, traced the outline of a faded photograph, the only link to a life that felt impossibly distant, a time before the endless waiting, before the betrayal. The memory of the man, the one who had promised passage, warmth, a new start, was a festering wound. He had taken everything, then left them to wither. She saw his face in her mind's eye, hear his voice, laced with a false sweetness that now echoed with chilling finality. "Mama died waiting at that depot," she whispered to the empty air, her voice thin, brittle as old parchment. The words tasted like ash. Her mother had withered day by day, her strength fading with each sunrise that brought no train, no reprieve. Alara had watched, helpless, the last embers of her childhood dying with her mother's last sigh. She was alone, utterly and terrifyingly alone. The depot was a tomb, and she, its only living resident, felt the weight of its stones pressing down on her. A shadow fell across the sun-baked floor, startling her. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, fear a sudden, cold river in her veins. A man stood framed in the doorway, a silhouette against the blinding sun. He was tall, lean, his face obscured by the brim of a wide-brimmed hat and a week's growth of dark stubble. His clothes were plain, dust-worn, practical. He carried nothing but a rifle slung casually over one shoulder. Alara scrambled back, her heart hammering against her ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. Every instinct screamed danger. She had learned, swiftly and brutally, that kindness was often a mask for cruelty, and strangers, particularly men, were to be feared above all else. He did not move, did not speak, simply observed her with an unnerving stillness. She could feel his gaze, an almost palpable weight. The silence stretched, taut and agonizing, broken only by the mournful whistle of the wind through the broken panes of the depot windows. She clutched the photograph tighter, its edges biting into her palm. Her desperation was a raw wound, exposed and vulnerable. The man stepped into the depot, his boots stirring the thick dust. He moved with a quiet economy, each step deliberate. He stopped a few paces from her, his gaze finally settling on her face, cool and appraising. His eyes, when she could finally discern them beneath the shadow of his hat, were a startling gray, neither kind nor cruel, merely observant. They held a depth that hinted at long journeys and hard-won knowledge. He wasn't overtly threatening, but his presence was formidable, an unyielding force in this desolate place. She waited, trembling, for the demand, the threat, the casual cruelty she had come to expect. Instead, he simply knelt, slowly, until he was at her eye level. He extended a large, calloused hand, not towards her, but towards the small, withered hand of her mother, still cold on the rough floorboards. His touch was feather-light, reverent, yet firm. It was then, as his fingers closed around her mother's, that he finally spoke, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, barely audible above the wind's lament. It was not a question, nor a command, but a chilling prophecy, echoing the very words that had become the core of her terror. He took her hand, Alara thought, a wave of sickening déjà vu washing over her, and whispered, "You will also." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning, wrapping around her like a shroud, trapping her in a cycle of fear she could not escape. The man's words hung between them, a cold, unblinking statement that offered no comfort, only the stark reality she already felt pressing down on her. Alara recoiled, pulling her mother's hand away from his tentative touch, as if the prophecy could be undone by a mere gesture. Her eyes, still wide with a primal fear, locked onto his. "No!" she choked out, the single word a fierce, desperate whisper. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow. She saw no pity in his gray eyes, but neither did she see the mocking cruelty she had braced herself for. He simply watched her, his expression unreadable, a stone-hewn face that betrayed nothing. He rose slowly, his gaze sweeping the dilapidated depot, taking in the empty crates, the tattered remains of their meager belongings, and the stark evidence of her mother's final days. His eyes lingered on Alara's emaciated frame, on the way her clothes hung loosely on her, a testament to prolonged hunger. He then turned and walked towards the door, his movements fluid, unhurried. He didn't look back. Alara's heart seized. Was this it? Was he simply leaving her here, to succumb to the same fate? The thought was a fresh wave of despair, even though his presence had offered no solace. Then, at the threshold, he paused. He did not turn, but spoke, his voice carrying easily over the sighing wind. "There's a storm coming. West," he gestured vaguely with his head towards the desolate horizon. Better shelter than this, he walked out, disappearing from her sight. Alara stared at the empty doorway, her mind reeling. The storm. She hadn't even noticed the darkening sky, so consumed was she by her own misery. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering, not just from the cold that was beginning to seep into the depot, but from the chilling implication of his words. He hadn't offered help, not directly, but he had offered a stark fact, an observation that held a grain of warning. Was it a test? A challenge? Or a strange, gruff invitation? The wind picked up, howling through the broken windows, rattling the loose planks. A few drops of rain, icy precursors, splattered on the dusty floor. Staying here was a death sentence. With a heavy, leaden heart, Alara made a decision born of sheer, desperate necessity. She pulled the thin shawl tighter around her shoulders, took one last look at her mother's still form, a silent vow passing between them, then stepped out into the gathering gloom. The world outside was a canvas of bruised purples and grays, the air thick with the scent of an approaching deluge. She saw him in the distance, a stoic figure already mounted on a dark horse, waiting. He had not truly left. As she approached, he didn't offer a hand to help her mount, nor did he speak. He simply shifted slightly, creating enough space for her to clamber up behind him. The horse, a sturdy, well-muscled animal, snorted softly but stood patiently. Alara settled herself, her small body stiff with distrust, yet a tremor of something akin to relief rippled through her. His back was broad, solid, an unexpected bulwark against the encroaching desolation. The cold seeping into her bones was momentarily forgotten in the strange warmth emanating from his silent presence. They rode west, the land stretching out, flat and unforgiving beneath the bruised sky. The wind whipped at their clothes, carrying the first icy needles of rain. Silas, as he had quietly introduced himself once they were underway, rode with an economy of motion that spoke of long hours in the saddle. He didn't speak, not a single unnecessary word. Yet his every action was precise, purposeful. He chose their path with an innate knowledge of the land, navigating invisible contours, avoiding treacherous washes. When the storm broke, a sudden, brutal onslaught of freezing rain and wind, he led them to a small, shallow overhang in a rocky outcrop, barely enough to shelter them from the worst of the elements. He dismounted, and without a word, built a small, smoky fire from damp scrub. The heat, meager as it was, felt like a miracle against the gnawing cold. He offered her a piece of dried meat, tough and flavorless, but she ate it ravenously, for the first time in days feeling a dulling of the hunger pangs that had been her constant companion. He watched her, his gray eyes observing her without judgment, simply registering her need. Alara, huddled by the small flame, studied him from beneath her lashes. He was an enigma. He had saved her from the immediate threat of the storm, yet his silence remained an impenetrable wall. She remembered the cruel words at the depot, the chilling echo of her mother's fate, and a fresh wave of suspicion washed over her. Was this simply a prolonged torment, a prelude to the same abandonment? Yet, as the hours wore on, and the storm raged outside their meager shelter, she noticed the subtle things. The way his body shielded her from the biting wind, the quiet rustle as he added more fuel to the fire, ensuring its warmth persisted, the almost imperceptible tensing of his muscles when a distant howl broke the din of the storm. He was a sentinel, silent, unyielding, a strange, unexpected guardian. Her fear did not vanish, but it began to mingle with a fragile, nascent curiosity, and a reluctant, undeniable flicker of something she had thought long dead, hope. The storm abated with the dawn, leaving behind a land scrubbed clean but still brutally cold. The sky was a vast, unforgiving gray. Alara felt stiff, her muscles protesting, but the gnawing hunger had dulled, replaced by a dull ache. She watched Silas break camp with practiced ease, his movements economical. He never asked where she was going, never asked about her past, never offered any explanation for his actions. It was an unspoken understanding. They were two solitary figures, bound by circumstance, moving forward. As they rode, the silence between them was not empty, but filled with the vastness of the land, the rhythm of the horse's hooves, and Alara's quiet observations. She began to notice details she had previously missed, details that chipped away at her initial fear. His hands, though rough and calloused, were capable, gentle even, when handling the horse. His eyes, though often distant, missed nothing. He pointed out tracks in the frozen earth, speaking only a single, guttural word, riders, a warning that sent a fresh shiver down her spine. The he who had whispered at the depot, the man who had promised her mother a new life only to abandon them, was still out there, a lingering shadow, a threat that had not vanished with the storm. They rode harder, Silas's posture now taut, his gaze constantly sweeping the horizon. Alara, despite her exhaustion, felt a surge of adrenaline. She had to survive. She would not become another forgotten body in this desolate land. She would not echo her mother's fate. The thought, fierce and unyielding, fueled her. The wind carried the faint scent of wood smoke, then the distant sound of voices. Silas pulled the horse to an abrupt halt, his hand already on the rifle. He dismounted swiftly, motioning for Alara to stay low. He moved with a hunter's stealth, disappearing behind a low ridge. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat. She strained her ears, hearing only the wind, then a faint rustle, the creak of leather. A moment later, a gunshot cracked through the stillness, impossibly loud, followed by a shouted curse. Alara's breath caught in her throat. Fear threatened to paralyze her, but the thought of her mother, waiting endlessly, dying alone, pushed her forward. She couldn't wait. She wouldn't. Scrambling from the horse, Alara cautiously peered over the ridge. Below, Silas was engaged in a desperate skirmish with 3 men. They were the kind she recognized immediately, rough, cruel, their faces etched with greed and violence. One lay prone, unmoving. Silas moved with a primal ferocity, his rifle a deadly extension of his will. But he was outnumbered. One of the men, a hulking brute with a scarred face, lunged, pinning Silas against a rock. His rifle skittered away. Alara's mind raced. What could she do? She saw a loose rock, jagged and heavy, near her foot. Without a second thought, she grabbed it, her hand surprisingly steady. With a silent prayer, a raw surge of defiance, she launched herself down the slope, her feet slipping on the loose shale. The brute was about to strike Silas. With a guttural cry, Alara swung the rock, connecting with sickening force against the man's temple. He grunted, stumbling back, dazed, giving Silas the crucial second he needed to recover. Silas moved like lightning, retrieving his rifle, ending the confrontation with 2 precise shots. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing and the low snorting of the horse. Alara stood, trembling, the rock still clutched in her hand. The three men lay motionless. Silas, his face grim, a smear of blood on his cheek, turned to her. His gray eyes, usually so impassive, held a flicker of surprise, and then something akin to respect. He nodded, a single, decisive motion. No words were needed. In that moment, something shifted between them. The fragile threads of tentative trust solidified into an unyielding cable. She had not been a burden, not a helpless victim. She had acted, defended, fought, and he had acknowledged it. The memory of the depot, of her mother's slow, agonizing demise, of the man's chilling prophecy, faded slightly, replaced by the vivid, undeniable reality of her own survival, her own strength. She had faced death and met it with a furious, defiant blow. She would not die waiting. She would not. The landscape, moments ago a desolate, threatening expanse, now felt less like a tomb and more like a challenging, yet survivable, path forward. They rode on, leaving the grim scene behind. The air felt lighter, cleansed, though the chill in the air remained. The heavy weight that had settled in Alara's chest for so long, the suffocating cloak of despair and helplessness, had begun to lift. The confrontation, bloody and terrifying, had paradoxically forged something new within her. She was not merely a survivor. She was a participant in her own fate. Her hands, once prone to trembling, felt steadier. Her gaze, once averted, now met Silas's without flinching. He had seen her at her most vulnerable, and now he had seen her capacity for ferocity, her will to live. He remained quiet, but his presence was a constant, reassuring anchor. He had not abandoned her, had not exploited her, had not uttered another cruel prophecy. Instead, he had offered quiet protection, and in turn, she had proven herself a capable, if unexpected, ally. They came to a small, secluded valley as the sun began its slow descent. A thin wisp of smoke curled upwards from a barely visible cabin nestled against the rise of a hill. It was a humble dwelling, rough-hewn and weathered, yet it spoke of permanence, of stubborn endurance against the elements. Silas dismounted, gesturing towards the cabin. "Here," he said, the single word a rare luxury. Alara dismounted, her legs stiff but her spirit surprisingly buoyant. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished, but clean. A fire crackled in the hearth, chasing away the pervasive chill. It was not a grand home, not the prosperous farm her mother had dreamed of, but it was shelter, warmth, and most importantly, it was safe. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alara felt the tension drain from her shoulders. She looked at Silas, truly looked at him, seeing not just the stoic survivor, but the quiet strength, the unyielding integrity beneath the gruff exterior. He moved to the hearth, adding more wood, the dancing flames casting long shadows across his face. "You can stay," he said, his voice low, his back still to her. It wasn't a question, but a simple statement of fact, an offer extended without expectation. Alara watched the flames, mesmerizing in their dance. The he who had promised her mother a better life, the one who had whispered a cruel prophecy, had become a distant, fading echo. The man who stood before her, the silent, capable Silas, had given her something far more valuable than empty promises. A chance to reclaim her own life, to define her own destiny. She thought of her mother, waiting, dying, at the depot, and then of herself, fighting, surviving, standing on the threshold of an unexpected future. The whisper of doom had been defied. She walked to the window, gazing out at the vast, silent land, now bathed in the soft, fading light of dusk. The world was still immense, still unforgiving, but she was no longer alone in it, nor was she afraid in the same way. The fear had not vanished entirely, but it was now tempered by a newfound resolve, a quiet strength that had been forged in the crucible of hardship. She had faced her demons, both internal and external, and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. A sense of purpose, of quiet dignity, settled over her. The journey was not over, but the path ahead, though uncertain, was one she would now walk with her head held high. She turned from the window, a faint, resolute smile gracing her lips, meeting Silas's gaze. He did not smile back, but his gray eyes held a quiet understanding, a shared acknowledgement of the hard-won journey. The future lay before them, unwritten. But for the first time, Elara felt a gentle, persistent hum of hope, a testament to resilience and the quiet power of human connection found in the most desolate of places. She had not died waiting. She would live and she would thrive.